watching Channel Africa Conversations.
Because development, which is the ultimate, either the individual or the context and the institutions you try to propel development in, can never happen in the absence of competent, committed, visionary leadership.
Hello and welcome to Channel Africa Conversations. I'm your host, Peter Ndoro. And today we are very honored to host Ambassador Toga Gaiwia Mc Intosh. He's a distinguished Liberian statesman whose extensive career spans national and international arenas. Ambassador Mc Intosh has served as Liberia's Minister of Planning and Economic Affairs, as well as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And on the international stage, he's represented 22 African countries as Executive Director on the board of the World Bank Group. Notably, he held the position of Vice President of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS Commission, coordinating the work of 13 commissioners across 15 member countries. Today, we explore, amongst other things, Ambassador Mc Intosh's career, the current state of ECOWAS, and we also examine the African Union's role in addressing the continent's pressing challenges. Ambassador Mc Intosh, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa Conversations.
Well, thank you very much, my brother, for the invite and the opportunity to share with you and the wider audience.
Ambassador, let's begin perhaps with your career, because it has been long and distinguished and largely in serving the public. What inspired you to to public service and international diplomacy?
Well, first of all, let me thank you again. And what really inspired these kinds of stuff, besides what people don't really call destiny, you just find yourself going along the way, catching making major decisions as you go along. And I have been very, very blessed to make the strategic and correct decisions to carry me through this kind of interesting path. So as I reflect on them these days, and I say, wait a minute, what has happened? I come to one critical realization. And that realization is for anybody, any country, any continent, to make an excellent mark during their journey. One must observe, you must study, you must analyze the circumstances around you. And then when you study them and you understand it, maybe as point A, the second one will lead you to go into another direction once you have analyzed it. And that's what, I was trying to do. It took me from being a civil servant, move into a managerial area, move into the political world, move into the international world. And all of these came from the analysis and the circumstances around. But more importantly, once you have completed the analysis, you must make the decision. Take that decision and take it boldly and move forward. So there are two things, whether you're a country, whether you are an individual, whether you are a continent, you must understand and consider the political, the social, and the economic circumstances, because you cannot isolate yourself from that type of environment. And once you've done that, then you must now move on and take the necessary action. Because development, which is the ultimate, either the individual or the context and the institutions you try to propel development in, can never happen in the absence of competent, committed, visionary leadership. And so, in short, my reflection on that path, which has been very, very checkered, but at the same time interesting and rewarding, I've learned this major lesson, and it still carries me through as I do. Over the last few months and years, all of my talking about and my researching and, influencing young people and so forth have brought to bear this realization. So that's it I have to say so far. I guess thank God.
And it's been a remarkable story. I am curious about the time you spent at the World Bank representing 22 nations in the World Bank's board. There's always been this worry that these international institutions such as the World Bank, the IFC, perhaps are too hard on African countries. What was your experience in terms of how these bodies work with the continent, and could they have done and could they be doing a better job?
You hit the thing on the head. The bank, particularly, which is basically a group, you call it the World Bank Group. So you have all these arms. You have the IFC, you have the IDA, International Development Assistance. But all of those things are controlled by the board. The board. And in that boardroom, we had 22 directors. They meet every Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then during the rest of the week, we're in committee meetings. But the primary objective there is to determine who gets what and when. And during my tenure, the voice of Africa, Africa's voice, was sort of minimal. We had two chairs, those representing the Anglophone countries and those representing the Francophone countries. And these two chairs, we were struggling at all times to get the African voice. There was an incident, and I think I can share this now that I'm on SABC. You were talking about your dam, this huge dam that you were now asking the bank to support. It's called ESCOM, I think, ESCOM. So during that debate, the board was not inclined in giving South Africa a loan. And South Africa was one of my constituents. So I had to speak up to make sure that this particular loan went through. It was a very, very serious ordeal, and it was a lesson for Africa. And I remember very well, up to the day we were to make the board decision, I had not gathered all of the yes that I needed to be able to carry my deed through. First, this huge amount, 3.1 or $3.2 billion, and they thought it was too much for Africa. And so somewhere along the lines, we came up to make sure, and the arguments they were making were the area in which ESCOM was an old ancestral graveyard, and they shouldn't disturb the grave of the people. Forgetting to know that Washington, D.C., where we were, where the building of the World Bank was the old graveyard of the Indians. So I had to draw the attention to that. Now, so to answer your question, there were cases, many times, where we had to fight. But gradually, during the end of my tenure, we got the third seat. That means now, out of the 22 or 23, there were 3 corners which Africa's interest will be coming from. Yeah. But it was a very good experience.
Let's turn our attention to the time you spent at ECOWAS, and this grouping, this regional grouping, seen as integral in promoting economic integration in West Africa. What do you consider as the grouping's most notable successes over time, and perhaps some of the obstacles that have stood in its way?
I was there in the role of being the vice president. And that role had both technical, professional, and diplomatic, tenets. In other words, you have to balance those hats. And so if you didn't balance them properly, the obstacles will mount. Now, what do I mean? If, for example, there was some regional conflicts, and you have to go there and try to bring into balance the causes of those conflicts, the elements that led to those conflicts. You have to approach it diplomatically. If you went there technically, you may come with empty hands. Now, that's one aspect. The second aspect goes back to the issue of this global fight. Because what is the objective of a regional organization like ECOWAS? As you rightly said, it is there to make sure that we develop West Africa. It's there to make sure that we collaborate and improve our own life and our own livelihood. Now, as I said, the outsider from that region, I'm talking about even Africa, South of Africa, are not interested in you doing that. And so you have to consistently deal with those possible obstacles. And mind you, resources, because you have resource constraints, we have to play this kind of, back and forth with them. And so they begin to determine what we do. That was a major issue. That was a major issue. However, there was an issue that we thought by coming up with strategic frameworks, by making sure that we align with the AU framework, to align with other RECs. We felt that during this kind of collaborative effort, we can reduce the tension, we can collectively deal with them, and move forward. So the ECOWAS experience that I had was, as I said, interesting. Interesting in the sense that here we were set up as an economic community and just focusing on economics, and at the same time, we got disrupted by civil conflicts that were spurred for other reasons. And during this kind of conflict, it took away the resources, both finance and human, focusing on making peace, security, and neglecting the economic aspect of the organization. Lately, I think there's a turnaround now that the conflict is eased a little bit, and efforts have been made to see how we can go back to deal with the economic challenges of the region.
Do you think that regional groupings like ECOWAS, SADC, the East African Community, genuinely have the capacity to deal with the non-war, in fact, non-economic issues, such as recently we've seen Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger opt out of ECOWAS and military juntas taking over. And it appears as if ECOWAS has found it difficult to solve that dilemma. Will we see potentially other African countries doing Brexits, as it were, pulling away from regional groupings so that they don't have to conform to some of the groupings rules?
I think in fact, I like the way you ended it, conforming to the rules. And I've come from two sides. One is, if you go through the protocols of ECOWAS, and I'm sure the same with SADC elsewhere, they have limitation on themselves as to the degree of interventions, the degree of interference, the degree of detecting what happened in member countries. So with that not in their hands, they can only sit on the sideline and helplessly look at what's happening. So somehow those protocols, those framework documents, perhaps we need to look at them because breakaways have their own negative impact on us, what we're trying to do. And there's a whole fight and determination in the past that we should bring all these RECs under the umbrella of an African economic community in which you got SADC, you got IFGAD, you got ECOWAS, you got all of these little small groupings under that umbrella. We've been spending years just fighting that. And so the more and more we do not deal with these protocols and try to harmonize it, the more we get away from that drain. So I agree with you that people will be hesitant to move forward. So what do we do under these circumstances? I think we will just keep blowing the horn. Integration, cooperation, opening our own markets from within, trying to come from within and put ourselves in a position on the global space as a region, given the kind of resources we have, given the human beings that we have. Of course, we need to shape them a little bit here and there, but given those kinds of resources, we definitely need to be able to move forward with this process. And I think one of the things I would like to emphasize also is while we are fighting to bring us under this big umbrella, we have to worry about the effectiveness of the big umbrella. And I'm talking about the African Union, because that's a parent. And under that parent, they should be able to watch and see what's happening. How do we get together? How do we, refence ourselves? And how do we move forward? But they themselves, their level of effectiveness should be taken into account to be able to carry us through.
We have a number of regional and Pan-African issues that we need to deal with now. The world is changing significantly. We talk about South-South cooperation. We talk about a recolonization in a different form by European countries, France. We even see the Russias and the Chinas interest in the continent. America, until recently. Where do we position ourselves with this second wave of interest, a modern type of move towards Africa? How do we as a continent face the opportunity maybe, and also the threat that comes with that?
How we go about doing it, in other words, we have recognized our question. What do we do about it? What, not the how. Because this how do we do it has been the question, but can we find an answer to that how? And in my mind, as I said over the years, these things have bothered me. And if I want to be as blunt as that, I could look at 2 or 3 things. One, I could start looking at us. Us here, I'm talking about African nations, internalizing and maximizing our comparative advantages. Now, our comparative advantages, known all over, is based on these natural resource bases that we have. That's one. That's the one that the traditional one people talked about. But my whole argument is, from my analysis and research, that constitutes a very small percentage of the potentials that we have. What are we talking about? The mineral wealth, where Africa holds 30% of the world resources in there. We hold about 60% of our agricultural land. We've got all the energy you can think about, but that's just a little drop. We will definitely have to harness what most people have been calling the intangible assets. And that intangible asset, we have to recognize the significance of it and really zero in on that. I'm still on the how. And that how, so let's go beyond exploiting and harmonizing and maximizing our natural resources that are just small, and we now capitalize our intangible assets. And here, I'm talking about those things about the human capital, innovation, the whole question of research, the whole question of moving away from just raw material exports and expand the value-added system to it. And if necessary, make sure that we do not have people derailing us away. So that's the first point. That means let us maximize our comparative advantages, and we must expand on our intelligence, on our human capital, and so forth. The other thing is we have to show the rest of the world. In fact, this is the most provocative one. We have to show the rest of the world that Africa is taking a new direction. They must feel it. They must see it. And that new direction of achieving self-sufficiency, that message, we have to personify it in what we do, what we say, and how we say it. That message must go loud and across the globe. We must build our internal capacities and our capabilities if we're going to implement that. And we're going to say we are now seeking self-sufficiency. Our capacities, human institutions, and all of these type of capacity must be built, and our capabilities of doing so. Second, we must deepen dependency on one another and reduce our dependency on the outside world, people outside of Africa. We have to reduce our dependency on them, and we increase our dependency on one another. And we can only do this again through these RECs, through these regional organizations, and really, really mounting the effort and the strategy. We can't just leave it. And third, the governors of Africa, those who are in respective governance positions, must assure of our people. They must be accountable to them. They must give them hope and let the people know, the Africans know, that they are part and in the center of the future of Africa. So from my perspective, this is what I would say, how do we really get out of this maze? How do we get out of this maze?
Yeah. In fact, you've partly answered my next question, and it's really about, it's almost as if we know what needs to be done, but do we have the leadership to get it done? What kind of leadership is required to create the Africa that we want by 2063?
You know, when we look at those few countries, not just in Africa, but outside of Africa, that have done these kinds of transformative exercises, if you analyze the type of leadership, there are certain key things that pop out. One has to do with vision. The person has a clear-cut vision as to where they want to take their people and their country. And that we're not talking about artificial vision. We're talking about someone who is preoccupied and can see the picture of what they want to create. Even as they are sleeping, they can see it. Then the other critical issue is having that vision is not enough. You must be action-oriented. Action-oriented. And that action requires being definitive, being clear, do the real leadership role, live by examples, and let people begin to see. That's why I'm saying few of the African countries are moving in that direction. And so we can see when we analyze the people who are leading them into that, we see this question of people who are action-oriented, visionary, and more so, you must be committed. Because his commitment here is where what sustains. Even if there's a slip, you can come back, refocus, carry your people along. That comes out of commitment, making the necessary sacrifices. Because once we recognize and we can pop these leaders up, unfortunately, we got 50 some more countries, so you're talking about 50 something leaders. And this is where the whole question of this conglomerate, this unity, because if you did that unity and we have a strong, powerful leader, they can lead the continent. And we saw that there was a period in our past where specific leaders were leading the continent. And that sort of faded away. And we just left, disjointed, organized, and so forth with inactive leaders. So you're right. What kind of leadership can give us the future that we can go through? And those key words, vision, commitment, action. And when we say action, you close your ears because there will be people who do not want us to succeed. They want us to succeed. Once we are successful, their own weight drops. And we are fighting for global resources. And so this is the paradox we have to face. But once you are determined to create, to make the future Africa, because Africa is the future. Once we are determined to do that, then certainly we should be able to carry those through, all mixed up and supported by strong political will of both. Listen, this one is critical, of both the leaders and the followers, because the followers are the one people can penetrate to derail the leaders. And so our education system, our political speeches, our behavior should be geared towards creating a very strong, committed followership. And for me, these are the things that are before us. Our generation is moving away, new generation coming in. We have to get this message to them.
Talking about this new generation, Africa is the youngest continent in the world by demographics, average age 19, which means actually this continent by and large belongs to them, and yet they are the most disempowered, the most disaffected. And I wonder what it is that needs to be done to make sure that they are put in a position where they can pick up, because they are the custodians of the immediate and longer term future.
You see, if you look at history or you look at outcomes from human capital, it tells you that this is that group of people, that young is the future. Now, how do you make that future? I always tell people, my writings and my students, I do teach graduate school, and I say the human capital is not our hairs, our eyes, our hands, and our legs. No, that is the suitcase. It's what inside the suitcase. In that suitcase, in that school suitcase, you must have the capital, the tools that can move mountains. And to get those tools, you don't pick them from the air. The country or the continent must decide what types of tools we need. Do we need big hammers, small hammers, saw? You just name the tools. Screwdrivers? Yes, we need all of those. Now, if we need them, can we create them? Yes, we can create them. And if we create them, can we utilize them? Yes, we can utilize them. But if the answer to these is yes, they are all yes, then certainly we must refocus, must redirect our resources, our energy, our policies to harnessing what is within those young people in Africa. Because as soon as you deal with their skills, you deal with their knowledge, you deal with their attitudes, you deal with their stamina, they are strong enough, not just sleeping on the streets. Once you deal with those and you sort of put it in a harmonized, coordinated fashion, we will see the changes. We will. I didn't say we may, we will, because it is the human capital that can change the world. It is the human capital among all the resources in the world that can manipulate them. The tree will not be a plank. The tree can never be a chair, can never make itself a table. Neither can the gold in the ground, the diamonds in the ground make their rings. It is the human capital that will do those things. So we are blessed, Africa, to have these young minds, use these young bodies, into which we can now inculcate the kind of skills, diversified skills. The skills is here in this context mean knowing what to do, knowing how to do that. And we can do that. And once we do that, and it has proven, we go to some of these Asian countries, even China today, they took a period where they were just focusing on that. And look at the payoffs. So we on this continent, we can do the same thing. And people think it's magic. No, it's policies, programs, commitment, that's all. There's no magic to it. Because if you took 1,000 men and women, you send them to the army camp, and you say, I want to see army officers. Give them 3 weeks, 3 months. You come back there, you see them behaving discipline, and so forth. So yes, I think that reservoir of young humans can be turned into a powerhouse of strategic human capital diversified.
Ambassador, it's been an honor and a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so, so much indeed. Your insights, very inspirational. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And that's how we come to the end of today's edition of Channel Africa Conversations. Thanks so much indeed for tuning in. Before I go, I just want you to know that we'd love to hear your thoughts on the conversations that we've been having. And you can see on the social media platforms that are on your screen now, that's where you can engage with us. Let us know who you would like to hear having a conversation with us, and what conversations would you like us to be having. We look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, take care.